be stored in the cloud than out of it. However, only 52% of sensitive data stored in the cloud is actually encrypted. So could your business be at risk? Here to tell us more is Brian Grant, Director of ANZ at Thales. Hey, Brian.
Good morning, Alana. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So what does your data tell us about the state of, our data security here in Australia?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I think what we're seeing is we're actually seeing an acceleration, particularly around COVID, around digital transformation and digital programs. And our research shows that about 3/4 of Australian organisations are actually initiating digital programs to try and be more competitive. And as a consequence, they're using data, and maybe a lot of forms of data that they've never used before, such as behavioural data, biometric data, and they're placing that data up in cloud platforms and environments to be faster and quicker. And they're leaving themselves a little bit exposed.
So when we talk about encryption then, for people that might not be as tech savvy, explain what that is and why it's important.
Well, maybe I should use the analogy I share with my children when they ask me, what do you do for a job? So think of it in the 21st century, data is sort of like the new class of asset, and like any asset, it needs to be protected. And what we do is we encrypt data, but what you can consider it is more or less like a bank vault for data, controlling who has access to it. If someone tries to take it or touch it, we actually alert and alarm people and notify them so that they can try and capture the bad guys before they get too close to it. And so what we do is we're sort of like the bank vault people for data and digital assets.
So when we talk about, the increase in digitisation, we've got a lot more workforces working from home at the moment. What does that do to our risk factors?
Really good question. Maybe I'll use a little simple analogy here. Before COVID, when we had a very limited number of people working from home, a very restricted use of remote systems, you can almost think of an organisation as protecting a lake, and they had a ship on the lake and they're protecting just the lake. Now, what's actually happening now with COVID is we're almost trying to defend an ocean. Everybody's working from home, everyone's using different tools that they've never used before. So the attack surface that we're trying to defend is substantially larger than it ever has been before.
So how can organisations, manage this better? How can they be improving their security?
Well, it's funny, your previous guest mentioned something about unconscious biases.
Yeah.
And I think organisations actually have an optimism bias. We know from the facts is that 1 in 4 organisations will have a cyber incident this year. And in actual fact, the cyber group anticipate that something like about $29 billion of GDP will be compromised as part of cyber incidents over the next 12 months. Now, that optimism bias means that organisations from the leadership down tend to think, hey, it won't happen to us. And the reality is, regardless of what industry you're in, you're now potentially at risk from both criminal activity, but also we have some geopolitical challenges now that we're actually more at risk from state actors. And they're not necessarily going after government assets. They're actually targeting what you and I would maybe consider just day-to-day sort of services, whether that be power, water, telecom. They're all at risk now because of the change in the world over the last few years.
Well, there's certainly a lot to keep an eye on in this space, Brian. If people want to contact you for more information, how can they do that?
Well, Thales actually have a very strong presence here in Australia. People don't realise that we've got thousands of people around the country, and we're basically listed. If you look at us up, you can phone us, and there's something like about 30 or different locations around Australia. So feel free to call any of those locations, and I'm sure that they'll put you in touch with me.
Thanks so much for joining us on the program, Brian. Appreciate your insight.
Thanks, Lana.
Brian Grant there.